Are we live? Are we live? Are we live? Let us know if we are live because we cannot work if we are not live. I need to know that the boys are live because if the boys aren't live, then we're just talking to ourselves. And me and Justin don't want to do that at this point. We don't want to just talk to ourselves. We want to talk to you guys. So let us know if we're live. We are live, says Bobby Wade. We got people saying it's live, 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 love, live, live, live. All right. So first episode of Giants Hard Knocks. So I don't know exactly where to start with. Really, the biggest thing that came out of it is a lot of Saquon stuff, which we'll get to. I thought the biggest thing to come out of that was the John Merritt comments at the end in his office.
And Tim McDonald, but yeah.
Yeah.
Runs in the family.
And then, Joe Shane maybe underestimating what he thought Saquon would get. But the biggest part out of it kind of got spoiled with the social media clip, that was promoting it in the Brian Burns trade. Some other stuff we can talk about, stuff that maybe they didn't talk about that we want to talk about. Where do you want to go first on this?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was really funny. We're not going to go into this, but some things that weren't mentioned found it to be really funny. Wink Martindale resigns. Okay, move on.
No mention of the defensive coordinator search either.
No, and that was a little frustrating. We barely saw Brian Daboll this episode. Which
it's more about Joe. Like the episode, this series is supposed to. This is the first time this series has ever happened, but it is supposed to be more about the front office portion than Brian.
No, but also I understand that, but you would like to think, and I think this is true. And also, Daboll revealed at the Giants' Night of Legends that whenever there was something that he really wanted to talk to Joe Shane about,
oh yeah, that's right, he
would turn on music in Joe Shane's office, so then the cameras can't use the copyrighted music on HBO. So Daboll got pretty smart as the process went on. But still, I would have maybe this will continue to happen at the combine. There's Daboll clips and stuff like that. Would have liked to see maybe a little bit with the defensive coordinator and the collaboration that happens between Brian Daboll and Joe Shane, because I do think it's not an entirely unique relationship that Daboll and Shane have, because there's other GMs and coaches around the league that I'm sure are very close, but I think it is unique because they have been working together for a long time. They even mentioned that Shane mentioned that they worked together in Carolina.
No, he was saying that Daboll was with New England when they beat Carolina.
Got it. But they've been working together for a long time. We know how close they are, and I hope that we see that as the month goes on.
Yeah. So, but let's talk with the Brian Burns stuff, because that's a big part of this, and obviously they're going to have the Brian Burns trade play out. So it'll be interesting to see if they show more about those negotiations in the next episode. But something we've been critical of Shane and specifically just drafting, right? Like you need to start putting all-star talent on this team. But the thing I've been the most positive of Joe Shane on, entering the third full year of him as GM, is the trades, right? And you get to see a little bit of how it goes, right? Like throwing out bullshit to Brandon Beane and Dan Morgan, like, hey, you guys want to trade up to 6, just throwing out there. And then I guess Morgan, a little open and brings up want to trade 2 firsts for Brian Burns? He's like, no. He's like, yes, but no. Basically like saying, yeah, I'd be interested in Brian Burns. He's like, what about a 1 and something? And they even brought up in their their pro scouting meetings talking about free agents. Chris Rossetti, that director of that, said it's probably going to take a 1 and something for Brian Burns. And to get that down to a 2nd and a 5th is again, we were think about it from the Panthers' point of view. I can't believe you traded away Brian Burns for a 2nd and a 5th, right? So that Brian Burns trade in a vacuum is really good. It's just if you want to poke holes in it, it's okay, but then you have to let a player like McKinney walk, and then you had to draft a safety in the 2nd round, and then you lost that 2nd round pick. But a 2nd and 5th to go from, you even saw in the promo of the combine where they say it's probably going to take 2 2s to go for him. So to get that to a 2nd, to get that to a 2nd and 5th is it shows when I tweet out Joe Shane's trades as a Giants GM, it's probably the most positive reaction there is to Joe Shane.
Yeah, the process is good. I mean, there's no doubting that the process with a lot of, the draft is an entirely different conversation, but, even the process with some of the draft stuff is good, but the trades have been on paper and as they happen, awesome. And even some of the ones that, I guess you could say the Waller one didn't necessarily work, but what did that actually really cost them, in the long run? So I just find it to be so crazy, man. This happened with the conversation of Dan Morgan and Brandon Bean was there, and then Brian Dable even showed, it looked like Brian Dable was showing Joe Schoen a tweet on his phone about, look at Shane Bowen's run defense ranks.
I thought
And
those were my tweets, and I went and looked, and they weren't mine. I was like, because those are the type of tweets that I do.
Well, yeah, right. Like listening, Bobby, I thought the same thing. I like looked up at my ceiling, and I'm like listening to the order of it. I'm like, is that one of our tweets that we just?
It sounds exactly like one of maybe he had screenshot a couple, but
but basically, one of my main takeaways is obviously I'm sure they get knee deep into talking about process and data. Joe Shin even mentioned something about that's what when he was talking with Frank Gore, that's what the data tells us. But I almost thought for most of that episode, it was just guys getting together, almost like a fucking podcast. And what we do at the John Boy Media office, just like talking ball. Oh, he's good in the red zone. Did Josh Jacobs lead the league in rushing 2 years ago? Oh yeah, he did. That's like the conversations that they were having. That's what it kind of felt like. A little bit fabricated, of course, but I was like, oh my God, this is like just what we do.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's you always keep in your mind like they know they're being recorded, right? So like, but again, like they had final say, so they had to go about their day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
Not everyone could be Brian Dable, start playing copyrighted music every time he talks to Joe Steen. But it really was, the focus was on the running back position, right? Like they brought up Zach Moss and Devin Singletary to start, right? Like even brought up that Frank Gore really liked Devin Singletary when he was with Buffalo, which makes me, because Frank Gore is one of my favorite players in NFL history. And here's where I don't think that Joe Schoen really ever had any intention on signing Saquon, unless it was something that was like $8 million a year, $9 million a year, right? He said like we could offer $7 million, but then that's we get looked at as disrespectful. But it definitely seemed like Joe Schoen was kind of set on moving off of Saquon, or thought that his value would be a lot lower with all the running backs that hit the market, and Saquon's wear and tear, because you saw Rossetti and other guys talking to him like, are you sure? Like, you don't think that Saquon's going to just get one team to be a big, give him a big deal? And Shane's like, well, what team is that going to be, right? What team has that need and is going to go spend that money on a running back? So you definitely see that Shane was pretty strong-willed in not bringing Saquon back. And it showed off the most in the John Mara conversation.
He even referenced at one point the fact that, what was the line? He was like 10 years off my life, when he was talking about
dealing with the franchise tag Saquon stuff the year before.
Like, and even like the contract negotiations. We even got the sense when he talked publicly about Saquon Barkley, how he was much more dismissive over the last 2 years. But then we even go back to the offseason of 2022, much more embracing of a guy like Daniel Jones. So between the representatives, Saquon, and I think even just Joe Schoen's overall philosophy, and as we've seen, maybe even some people in the building, it may not just have been the whole negotiation process. It also may have been trying to talk John Mara off the ledge of.
What did Tim McDonald say? I've seen a couple people reference that, and I didn't catch it.
Yeah, well, he was, Tim McDonald. This was after they showed this, after that Joe Schoen had the conversation with John Mara. And I take way more stock out of the conversation with Tim McDonald, because Tim McDonald's the director of player personnel. He has way more of a football influence, so to speak, than John Mara, even though John Mara is the boss. Yeah. So
I mean, they had meetings with just him, Brandon Brown, and Tim McDonald.
Yeah. Some of the major conversations. And what he was saying is, well, are we sure we want to do this? This is the source of explosivity. This is our touchdowns. This guy he's basically saying this, it's been the best part of our offense over the last couple of years. So are you sure you want to so willingly just let him go? And that's where Joe Schoen said, I really recommend, like, I'm going to rewatch certain parts of this. I really recommend rewatching the last 5 minutes of this, because the last 5 minutes of Hard Knocks was the most significant part of the episode. And Joe Schoen's response is, we're paying a quarterback $40 million, and it's not to hand the ball off to the running back a million times. We're not
going to invest in the offensive line,
right. And he kind of meant, kind of without saying a prove it year for Daniel Jones, saying that this is a year for Daniel Jones to really step up. And is he worth it, or do they need to pivot? And I even took a screenshot of what Research Rick said the actual quote was, and I have that right here. This is the year for Daniel. The plan is all along was to give him a couple years. Is he our guy for the next 10 years, or do we need to pivot and find somebody else? And that was the Joe Schoen.
And I want to talk about the Daniel Jones stuff. And so here's the thing. I didn't think I would come away with anything negative because they had final editorial say. It's the off season, right? So you're not dealing with like wins and losses and stuff. And everyone loves their own off season as a front office. This is where I was like, oh my gosh, is the John Mayer conversation, right? Being like, I'm not comfortable letting him go until we prove we can be a decent offense without him. But it's like, we've been a bad offense 3 out of the last 4 years.
Right. That's the thing I don't understand.
With him, right?
With him,
like, and just continue to like, and that's where like, hey, awesome that Joe Schoen is strong-willed enough to push back on that, and then eventually just not do that decision. But that's where it's frustrating, where it's like, yeah, is John Mara going and saying, no, we have to go do this? That's never been the claim from 99% of people who have issues with Mara and how he works the team. That's never been the claim. The claim is when your boss recommends something, you all put yourself in your own situation, even if you think it's wrong. It's hard to go against it. It is just hard to go against it, right? It's easier to protect yourself and just do what they want to do. Every single person who's ever had a job has been through that, right? And then when you have Tim McDonald, who is his son-in-law, has the third highest position in the front office, is kind of sounding like a branch of that. That's where it gets frustrating with the nepotism. Like, right, Chris Mayer has been pushed out in a sense, from where he was a few years ago. But that's where it's like, it's frustrating that, hey, why is Tim McDonald looked at as this genius? He's been here for the entirety of like the Giants' worst years, and he's the son-in-law of the owner, right? So he cannot be fired. That's where I get frustrated. Is that like is with that? Is like, man, like I understand the owner's going to have some conversations and stuff, right? But it still does bother me.
And did you hear even Maris suggest that, well, if we move off of Saquon, then we'll have to draft a running back high? And then Joe Schoen's like, no, I need to talk you off the ledge of that. There's other replacements. There's guys that, we can even sign a running back. Maris started to say, well, we have to draft a running back high. And then again, Schoen had to talk him off the ledge. So, there's always going to be disagreements. There's always going to be, guys that always don't see eye to eye philosophically. I find it to be like, it doesn't surprise me that maybe John Maris still thinks this way. It's a little disheartening that maybe he, after this whole Saquon Barkley experiment, he still thinks the answer would have been, oh, well, we have to invest big in it. We have to invest big at running back, because that's the way the game was played. That's when the Giants were winning Super Bowls, and even back in 07 and 11, but especially when he was a kid growing up in 87 and 90, that's the way the game was played, where running back was the premium position. So yeah, it's a little frustrating to have an owner that still maybe thinks of the game that way. But it's more disheartening to hear Chris McDonald talk about that, who has such a prominent position in the front office. And not to say that he thinks that drafting a running back in the first round in the year 2024 is a good idea, but for him to say, well, this guy is the source of our explosiveness, and the Giants are the worst offense in the NFL in explosive plays. To hear him talk about that, and to not think that an offensive philosophy could be of change could be a good thing, that is more disheartening than what John Mayer had to say.
Yeah, that's the like I because they had final editorial say, I didn't think I'd come away frustrated with anything, and I was again frustrated with that. Let's talk a little about the Daniel Jones stuff in there. This is the one thing I take with the biggest grain of salt. One, they knew where they were picking in the draft, right? And at this point, they probably had a good idea that they didn't like JJ McCarthy enough to pick him. But this is why I take it with a grain of salt, is because we know that they wanted to go up. Like, and we'll see. Maybe they show some of that. I doubt it, but like we know that they wanted to go up. So when he says like, I still believe in this kid, and the stuff that he brought up is true. Like the offensive line issues, when Thomas went down, and then 3 practice squad guys starting versus Miami, like those things are true, right? Like me and you both agree. Daniel isn't as bad as he was last year, but we also saw things
storm of bad.
We saw things that made us go long term, like, okay, this is not it, right? Yeah. It answered questions that we had coming out of 2022 when they gave him the contract.
So
but I didn't take any of that too serious, just because we kind of have the knowledge that they wanted to get quarterback,
right? And I think it matches what Joe Schoen has publicly said too, where they didn't really talk about Daniel Jones's play. And this is something that we've pushed beat reporters on too, where how come, like, Is it just the injury concern thing? Or are we talking about Daniel Jones's play too? And Ryan Dunleavy, the guy, one of the guys that you hear Ryan Dunleavy, he got like major airtime in the beginning with Thomas and talking to Thomas and then talking to Saquon. I'm pretty sure that was Dunleavy, right? Did
Yeah.
you hear that?
Yeah.
So Dunleavy mentioned in one of our early offseason interviews that there are certain people that are, that questioned, well, why was Tyrod Taylor's play and why was his ability to push the ball down the field so much better and also just at a higher rate than Daniel Jones? But that's not the public display that Joe Schoen has showed, and that was not the public display that Joe Schoen showed during this Hard Knocks episode. But I mean, they've made very, very clear that multiple times stated that they need a backup plan. They even need contingency plans now, but they're framing it not on his play. They're framing it on the injury history, which that's also not wrong.
And it goes back to the Mara thing. Is like you wonder about it. Like we said it. I can't remember what week it was where we heard and we talked about it on the preview podcast, and it made some waves where I was like, the idea right now is John Mara is pretty pissed off. One, about the way the season has gone, but also the conversation on the quarterback where he's like, how are you going to pick a quarterback if you just paid one?
Oh, I'm pretty sure that also made him mad because, Joe Schoen is sitting there saying that we can't pay Saquon Barkley because we're paying Daniel Jones. And then Joe Schoen, meanwhile, is also saying that we need to possibly find a contingency plan for Daniel Jones. And that's one of the reasons why they can't pay Saquon, because he wants both of them here. So I can imagine it's frustrating for Giants fans. It's frustrating for me, but also at the same time, I do appreciate the Giants knowing in the back of their brains that they do need to, and they probably will move on from Daniel Jones, but also airing the sentiment that we can't give up on him. They can't. If you're paying him $40 million this year and you gave him that contract, you can't fully give up on the guy, because then I think that would just be bad process. If you're going to be
if they traded up and drafted May or drafted McCarthy,
right, like they kind of wanted to.
He would be on the team, but they would have given up on him.
Yeah.
The other, again, some of this good stuff was leaked, right? Like what Shane Bowen's looking for in a scheme, the 3-4 base, inside linebackers have to be the smartest position. We knew that. I think everyone looks at the Simmons quote as like, oh my God, he has these big plans for Simmons. To me, I think Simmons could get cut, right? I think Simmons has value on that third down money backer role, which Wink Martindale did. So I think he has value, and I'd like to keep him on the team. But I don't view it as like, the early down nickel, as like, okay, Isaiah Simmons is going to be playing a lot of early downs. Like I sincerely doubt that Isaiah Simmons is going to be playing a lot of early down nickel. I think that's a special package, maybe when they go heavy with 2 tight ends or something.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, which I still think for a team that is desperate for run stoppers in the secondary, I do think that is somewhat valuable, because it actually was a conversation. I don't know if you saw that I tweeted this out, Bobby, but it was a conversation that you and Dan Schneier had a couple months back. And it reminded me that in 2022, Isaiah Simmons saw, I have it right here, Isaiah Simmons saw a lot of snaps at slot corner.
Yeah, that's
and the amount of snaps that he saw, 409 of his 897 snaps in 2022 were at slot corner. And we thought at the time that we traded for him that was a really odd thing. And now we may have to go back at some games and watch Isaiah Simmons at slot corner to see exactly how he did.
He was okay in man coverage on like some, not so great tight ends and stuff, but it's just it's hard to find a consistent, like there'll be some specialty packages for Simmons, but there's not going to be a consistent role for Isaiah Simmons, right? Like Wink Martindale was on like some show and talked about how he believes in that guy like no one else. I still believe in that guy, but Wink Martindale didn't play him on early downs either.
Mm-hmm.
So if Wink Martindale, who's the guy who believes in the most, didn't play him, that speaks. But I do think he'll have a third down role replacing McFadden, because he is better in coverage than McFadden. Other stuff, again, they didn't mention anything about Wink Martindale besides the news clippings, the defense, they didn't talk about going after Denard Wilson or any of the other Bobby Babbitt or any other defensive coordinator candidates. I thought we could get a little bit on that, not on Wink Martindale, but on like the deciding of who the defensive coordinator is. Maybe Dable did the music for that.
But it also feels like it forces you to read the tea leaves when you don't see something. Where one of the things that we were saying in the moment is Denard Wilson, I think, was their first choice.
Oh, he was their first choice.
He goes somewhere else. Bobby Babich, they interviewed next, and I feel like that he was their second choice.
But McDermott upgraded him to
he
DC.
stays in Buffalo. So I have to kind of presume maybe sometimes the things that we don't see or hear speak louder than the things that we do hear. And Shane Bowen was probably not their first or second choice at defensive coordinator.
Yeah. All right, let's hit some chats. I did find it very funny. Like when we talk about Isaiah Simmons, where Bill was like, Boogie Basham, is that a role for him? Ryder Anderson. It's like, nope, that's probably not going to be it, Shane Bowen.
That clip was pre Brian Burns, but yeah.
I know. We're probably going to have to upgrade a little bit. I don't think Boogie Basham's going to fit that pass rush mold.
What do you think about this? I have some other smaller notes. When Joe Shane was talking to Frank Gore and somebody else at the East-West Shrine Bowl, he says he doesn't care about age, particularly when talking about quarterbacks. Age depends on the position, which I think we do very much have a precedent that Joe Shane cares about age, at least on day one and day two.
He said, I think he only said quarterbacks, and then he brought up Saquon. He's like, he had 900 carries at Penn State, then 6 years in the NFL. Like, that's basically making like he's older than what his age says.
But what do you think about the quarterback point?
It makes you think of like if someone like Jaden Daniels when it's swing you away. So I did like that because for the most part, like when everyone brings up like Sam Darnold's age, I'm like, age doesn't matter for quarterbacks. Like we're not talking about their athletic profile and their lasting their athleticism lasting in the NFL. It's really like, to me, I judge you by like years of experience, not your age, unless you're fucking Brandon Weeden, 28 years old. So, but hey, when they are looking for a quarterback, we know not to knock someone who's a 23 fifth year redshirt senior.
That's certainly helpful.
His grandma's a freak. Future 26 says
his grandma is a freak.
Sam Hartman, which we always say Nick Filato looks like Sam Hartman, which means that Nick Filato could probably get with Joe Shane's grandma.
Sure.
Who's 92.
Joe Shane loves peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which is super.
He couldn't tell you what station the sports radio was on.
I don't believe that.
Yeah, definitely don't believe that.
I don't believe that. You have to tune everything out. I think the fact that they chose.
They don't tune anything. I mean, they're not sitting here reading everything and listening to everything, but you'd be surprised how much like these guys pay attention to shit.
Yeah, they pay attention to, maybe they even pay attention to us.
I mean, they were like in like some important scene and one of their PR guys was like the closest person to Joe Shane in there. Like their PR guys bring him most stuff.
Christian Wilkins and Joe Shane apparently text, Dexter Lawrence and Joe Shane apparently text, and they were texting about Christian Wilkins, and I never knew that Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence were best friends. Never knew that.
That means you're a bad Giants analyst. They were Clemson teammates, bro. How do you not know that?
I'm a bad Giant fan.
They were picked 2 picks apart. Why is Joe Shane so obsessed with PB&J? Because it's like the cheapest lunch there is.
Yeah.
Have you ever been poor, bro? You'll get obsessed with PB&Js if you're poor.
And if you're allergic to peanut butter, then what is? Oh, it's like marshmallow. What is it called? Fluff. Fluff is a great substitute.
Wasn't it weird? Sean talked about it. Yeah. Well, Jalen Hyatt should be eating peanut butter and jelly. So he needs to get bigger. So I mean, again, they talked about all the running backs. Josh Jacobs and Pollard off a down year.
Chris Rossetti ran the show for a couple
Kevin
months.
Abrams kind of rightfully called that Jacobs would get more money than Saquon Barkley, which I don't know what the guaranteed money was, but Jacobs got 4 years, 48, because of a year and a half younger.
I missed that line. I was going to ask you if you heard what he had to say, because it was. I was like, oh my God, there's Kevin Abrams, and he even looked a little different too. So it's really just, at least from what we know, the two major people in the organization that are still left over from, the dog years are Kevin Abrams, but I don't think he has like much of a role. He's like the cap guy. And then
Kevin Abrams, he was talking about like he was the one that was projecting like the guys what they're gonna get and stuff. So
Yeah.
he's not talent evaluation, but he is predicting what guys are gonna get. Then bringing up Chris Jones made like everyone's like, could you imagine the best two? Like they're the best two defensive tackles in the NFL. I have Chris Jones 1, Dex 2, Quentin Williams 3.
Yeah,
that would be nuts.
Did you hear they were about to start talking about Leonard Williams, and then they fucking cut the audio and they cut
I
away.
didn't hear that.
No, and then they said, and then there's Leo, and then they stopped. And I would have loved what they had to hear what they had to say about Leo.
They mentioned like when Joe Shane was basically making the pitch to not take Saquon. He's like, well, where does a running back line up value wise when we need a corner? He brought up corner, a rusher, number one receiver. I know they got Drew Phillips in the 3rd round, but that's still like a huge question mark on this team. And that was something that they viewed as a need in February and didn't get to. It was nice to see the Senior Bowl, our home, which we found out today we're going to be going back to next year.
Yes,
which is exciting. Let's get a couple more questions, then we got to go. We actually have to record our 4th of July mailbag, which is going to be going into the late hours.
So they mentioned about we need to build an O-line. We need to build an O-line, and with the the fortunate thing of hindsight, I think there's some fans that are split. There's some fans that think that they did enough to build the O-line this offseason, and then you and I are in the department of no, if their goal was to fix the O-line this offseason, they didn't even come close to trying.
I think they made like solid moves, but again, I've talked about this at extent, is that when you put Jermaine Elamanour and said you are the starting left guard instead of battling for a tackle job, you are one Evan Neal domino away from chaos. And so
Evan Neal kind of just ruins everything.
Yeah, like you're putting Runyon at right guard because you want him to be next to Neal. Like you're letting Neal make a lot of.
They're going to talk about Neal. Like I think that's inevitable.
Yep. All right. Let's do one more question and then we'll get out of here because, like I said, we got to do our 4th of July mailbag. Which, hey, if you want to watch it live, it'll be on patreon.com/Giants.
If you want to hear us, if you want to hear us not talk about Giants football.
Yeah, actually, we're not going to be talking about any Giants. A little bit of like hypothetical like stuff, but yeah.
This is a good one. Are you shocked about how vocal they are about the pressure on Daniel Jones?
Like pressure to perform?
Yeah, I guess that would be the pressure. Yeah.
No, I mean it's obvious with the contract, where they can get out of it next year. Like it's obvious.
And I think they kind of realized that they got to win again. They got to win more games.
Yeah, that was another thing. Joe Shane kept on bringing like we got to fucking win. We got to fucking win. Like he was.
It's tough to hear like over and over again because this team with injuries. It's tough to hear. This was even going back to the Gettleman era of these guys and this core only played together for 60 snaps. It's like, can we just have a year where that doesn't happen and we just see what happens?
It was 2022, honestly.
Yeah.
Dinkelberg, thank you for the super chat. Justin Beard is hard. Got it. You should shave the head now that you're getting a beard.
Well, in a couple of weeks I will need a haircut and that will happen. So
yeah, show up like that to training camp.
Yeah, honestly, that's probably when I'm going to need a haircut next.
All right. That's an episode. That's a reaction. We'll be doing the same exact thing next week. So excited for episode 2. I always thought episode 1 would be a little slow getting off the ground anyways.
Yeah. Also, please subscribe to this channel if you're not subscribed.
Like and subscribe, please. Please like and subscribe. And we're going to go record our 4th of July mailbag. If we don't see you until the 4th of July, happy friggin' 4th of July. And let's go Big Blue.